Economia partidei Delgado, acolo este va fi corner, dragi ascultători.
Time. Your video is suitable for advertisers. Thanks, YouTube, you dicks. Cool. All right. Nice. So let's let's do it. Let's do it. Hello, welcome back to It Ain't Broke. Today we're going to be discussing a really depressing film. We're here to talk about Jimmy Murakami's animated version of Raymond Briggs' book, When the Wind Blows, which is kind of distressing and upsetting in a number of different ways.
And animated.
And animated, yeah. And yes, animated. So, for those of you who don't know, Raymond Briggs is a very kind of storied British comics creator. He didn't really exist in the kind of comics sphere, though. He published stuff that just came out as books. So The Snowman is the most famous one.
It's a classic,
and this movie follows on from The Snowman. It's also based on his book, so they wanted to adapt another Raymond Briggs thing. There's also Gentleman Jim, Ethel and Ernest, quite a few bits. I'm a huge fan of Raymond Briggs' work. Fungus the Bogeyman as well was a Briggs book. He's got this kind of great sense of bleak, pessimistic Britishness, I think sums up.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, isn't it? Like even the snowman is like a sort of fondly remembered Christmas tradition, but it's still quite.
The ending is quite sad and quite bleak, yeah.
So they thought, how can we top this?
So for those of you not in the know, this is kind of an anti-nuclear war piece that adapts his book pretty directly. It's about an elderly couple. As Adam and Joe described it, it's about an elderly couple, the sweetest elderly couple you could imagine, slowly dying of radiation poisoning. So spoilers, it's about a couple of pensioners that die of radiation poisoning. The point is that they're oblivious, they live in the Sussex countryside, and they directly follow, this is a British government guideline book called Protect and Survive, which is ludicrous advice that would never help you survive anything, that was issued to kind of make the population feel a bit safer, and I have to have a copy here. So part of the rub of When the Wind Blows is it's a reaction to that. So you see what happens when two people out of the blast zone follow Protect and Survive, and they both die. And quite a lot of it is based on the fact that, very horribly and slowly, it's based on the fact that A, they're unable to let go of their concept of World War II, and secondly, that they are just old and they don't quite get it. And, so it's a very interesting film. I think it takes some liberties with the source material that I take issue with, which we'll get into. Why don't you tell me about how you first experienced When the Wind Blows and how you experienced it this week?
Sure, yeah. I mean, so I watched it the other day in preparation for this. Prior to that, I'd watched it quite a number of years ago. I think I might have even been a teenager at the time, just when I was kind of finding out about a lot of these type of things. I think, Threads that we're going to talk about, that's, the kind of the big hitter of the nuclear apocalypse genre, but then you kind of have a look and see, what else is there. And I'd heard about this as, possibly the most sort of depressing animated feature ever and stuff like that. So I thought I'll check it out. So I'd watched it years and years and years ago, but I, as I say, rewatched it again for this. It's the first time I've watched it for a long time now. Mm-hmm. So slightly differing opinions between initial watch and this one, I'd say.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Hasn't aged well, you think? Or?
Not that it hasn't aged well. I mean, I think it's definitely very much about kind of old school British animation. It's got a really quite unique look to it, hasn't it? Because it's shot, it's mainly models. The house is models. Yeah, it's 2D characters with physical miniatures. Yes.
So it's traditional hand-drawn cell animation over a stop-motion elements and a 3D house, which is quite unique. Yeah. It's very unique because quite often, sometimes when they put like a jacket down, it then transforms into a
things flip between the two, don't there? There are certain objects that will be hand-drawn, and then go back to being model or vice versa. But yeah, I think I don't know. I think in my head, I'd kind of remembered it being a bit, I don't want to say better, but a bit maybe more of a successful kind of anti-nuclear piece, I guess, than I found it this time. I don't know, I mean, I'm not familiar with the original book, I haven't actually read it, so you can talk through that, but I just felt like maybe the kind of whole setup of it, of this, stereotypical elderly couple being very British about everything, is almost too over the top, to the point where like it seems like there's never any kind of acceptance between them of what's actually going on.
But I think
they just stoically carry on with making cups of tea up until the end.
That's the point, though. It's because it's the failure of the British attitude to adapt to a changing world, and it's the failure to adapt, and because Jim blogs just trust whatever the government tells him, and bless him, he just parrots governmental guidelines
Yeah, no. I mean, you know, I definitely see that point, and that's the whole point of the minute is how it is in the book, right? But I felt like kind of that for me, having this on the second watching, that kind of detracted from it a little bit, because I'm not saying I didn't enjoy it, I didn't think it was good, but
yeah, sure.
They were so, focused down this line of like, oh, it'll all be all right.
The inner corner refuge.
You kind of, I think the problem is I stopped sympathising with them after a while, because I was just like, they were just annoying me a bit.
Right. Okay.
If you see what I mean, I don't mean that in a, obviously
no,
it is a very
sad
piece, but it's just like, come on.
I think because it's making a point with all that. I think that's the thing.
Absolutely. But in terms of my personal experience of it the second time around, I felt like that detracted from it a bit compared to something like Threads.
Right, yeah, no, Threads, we'll get to Threads.
Yeah,
that's a whole other thing. I mean, I think part of this, there's a long tradition in kind of satire of dressing something up in a cute way to therefore make a serious point. It goes all the way back to Swift, he did the same thing, and there's a kind of sarcasm to it. I mean, there's sort of twee Britishness, the kind of exploration of sort of twee Britishness and the dark side of it, I think it's something that Raymond Briggs does really well. And it's comparable to the way David Lynch handles like Americana. It's kind of like, here's the front of this and here's the back of that. I take issues with this as an adaptation, right, for a couple of reasons, and that's based on, so I own the DVD, I own the book. I can't remember which way around I did this, but I experienced both of them when I was really quite young. Right, okay. And it was just like, because, I think I saw, this is very classic, my brother Niall was always very good at showing me stuff, and particularly stuff that's on Channel 4. Right. And he was kind of like, we have to watch this.
Stuff that was going to disturb you and stay with you.
Yeah, precisely. I do give credit to my big brother. I owe him quite a lot on that front. Yeah. And this is one of them. So I think we watched the animated one, and then I sought out the book. I mean, I've had this particular copy for quite some time. I bought it in Borders, I think, but I would have read it in the school library as well. Sure. They do the core story, the inner core or refuge. This core story is pretty much exactly the same. Right. Jimmy Murakami is quite a storied and experienced director of animation, did quite a lot of stuff. He directed a segment in Heavy Metal, for example. Oh, okay. So there's a very experienced animation team behind this, and I think the visual look to it's very interesting. Yeah. And I think it really works. I think it's quite audacious. It's quite an audacious blend of things. So you have the stop motion, live action, stock footage, traditional cell, layered and integrated, but also sections that are kind of appear to be chalk or like kind of pencils on construction paper. Yes, like
those sort of fantasy sequences.
The fantasy sequences.
She blows the dandelion or whatever, and it kind of goes away.
The fantasy sequences are not from the book, and I just don't feel like they have any business being there. No. The film grinds to a halt every time they happen.
Yeah, I mean, having not read the book and not knowing that until we just talked about it, I did feel watching it that those fantasy sequences didn't really have much of a place there, and didn't really serve any purpose other than to fill up a bit of time.
It's frustrating because they're really nicely made, but it's like, why? Yeah. What's this for? And it is just to kind of, I mean, so the things that don't work for me, that doesn't work, I don't think. Yeah. There's some, David Bowie did the title song. He was supposed to do all of the soundtrack, but he didn't. Roger Waters came in and did the music. Yeah. There's some really, the music, when they demonstrate the bomb going off, there's really spooky music, that kind of driving drum beat, I really, really like. There's certain things, and I think when you adapt things to different mediums, you should be exploring what one medium can do and one can't. Sure. So the comic does things I think the cartoon can't, but the cartoon does things the comic can't. I mean, particularly the sonic scape of it, like when after the bomb's gone off, you can hear sort of dogs dying in the soundtrack. There's like birds flapping around and stuff. The comic can't do that, and it can't show anything in motion. Yes, that's true. The bomb sequence was particularly effective. Yeah, because I've literally just flicked through this a minute ago before we switched the camera, and in the comic, the actual explosion is just two almost completely white pages, which I think is great. But obviously, that doesn't really translate to film. So what you've got in the animated version is. It seemed to me like most of the explosion sequence was lifted from those old films from the US military where they did tests and they set up fake buildings. There is one shot. It's got the same look. It's in sepia and it's. There's one shot of a house being destroyed by the blast. Yeah. And I needed to check and I didn't have time. I'm absolutely certain that's one bit of exactly that stock footage that they rotoscoped. Yeah, I'm absolutely certain. Possible, yeah. No, we've all seen those loads of times. Yeah, you see them used time and time again, and I'm certain they've just rotoscoped over that, which is very effective. And the stuff of like the train derailing. Yeah, I was going to say they've embellished it with stuff like that, which works really well, and it's stuff that the film can do and the comic can't. Yeah. Because like you say, the blast is white splash pages with kind of airbrushed pink fringes.
Yeah.
They very slavishly recreate like the opening of the first act of the film is interjected with a shot of a missile, and it's all smoking. It's like a model. It looks really good. It's kind of 3D. The comic has splash pages of submarines, missiles, and planes.
Yeah, all of which they had.
Yeah, they're all put in the film, which works. There's a bit where they're kind of reminiscing about the old times. And you know, one of the great moments of their kind of naivety is they talk about Stalin as being a friendly old uncle. And they draw him as like a jolly guy and stuff. And General Montgomery, that's a kind of a splash page in the book. In this, it's kind of like these 2D, not 2D, but like flat painted elements like rod puppets with loads of green smoke.
Yeah,
it's really good. It's really nice, effective.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of that, isn't there, where they're discussing something and there'll be these sort of fantastical elements coming into, rather than just the pure fantasy elements we were talking about previously, where they'll have like the bit where they imagine this, you know, huge Russian turning up at their house to kill them and stuff, and you see, like, you know.
Yeah, and that stuff and the General Montgomery stuff, that's from the book.
Yeah.
So the huge, because he's like an 8 foot tall Russian
he's a massive guy. Like.
Yeah, that's from the book, and that stuff makes sense because it serves the story and it serves the kind of you know, they kind of live in a fantasy world, and, you know, they've never been able to let go. And you know, I think it's Briggs is trying to say that the British psyche is inherently backward looking and refuses to adapt. And
yeah, I mean, they're talking about World War II throughout most of it, like it was the best time of their lives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, it was all about what was it, like looking at pin-up girls in your Morrison shelter, and it's like, well, we had an Anderson, and it's all Vera Lynn and eating spam, you know, and they don't
drinking tea on VE Day and all the rest of it, and it's like
they make reference to the Holocaust very briefly, which I think is telling, because it's not really a concern to them, because they're all about spam and fucking Vera Lynn, you know. So it's kind of a look at not necessarily a dark side of the British psyche, but like a kind of an uncomfortable look at that. Which, you know, I think it's really prescient.
Yeah, it's that kind of sort of, you know, shut up and get on with it type of thing. Like,
stiff upper lip. Yeah, don't make a fuss. All that. You know,
even when it is literally crumbling around their ears.
And she's, you know, the cake's burnt and her cushions, and there's glass everywhere. Yeah, you know,
just kind of sweeping up and putting things in bins. And it's like,
and just getting on with it. They get on with it until they die. And Jim has a fucking answer to everything.
He does. He's usually referring back to the government.
The governmental guidelines in a coral refuge. And the council leaflet and the Protect and Survive contradict each other.
Yeah, and he addresses that, doesn't he?
Yeah, he kind of, what is this, you know, and that at the time as well, coming out when this came out in the 80s, like when that was current information. That's really important. Just be like, look, no, this doesn't add up. Like what they're telling you is bullshit. I mean, that's why this is so important. I mean, one thing in particular that I've already raised with you, which I really have issue with, is when the bomb goes off. We talked about this just before we rolled. Like, he calls her a stupid bitch. Yeah. And
it's massively jarring, isn't it?
Really jarring. I don't think it's in character with Jim, and I don't think it serves any real purpose, because in the book he calls her a fool. Yeah. And the dialogue is exactly the same, but he calls her a fool and she reacts in the same way, because they're supposed to be so mild that probably calling her a fool is the rudest thing he's ever said to her, you know, or whatever. So when he calls her a bitch, it's a bit like, is that really?
And it fits less well as the story continues, because obviously after that point things just get worse and worse and worse for them. But other than that one little blip, he just carries on the same answer for everything. It'll be all right. Da 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 da. You know, so it's so jarring. It's such an obvious sticking out. You know,
it's like a slap in the face, and not in an effective way.
No,
you know what I mean? Because sometimes you can flip something like that, and it's like, oh god, but it doesn't feel. You know, it's not effective, and it just kind of.
Yeah, they've changed it for whatever reason, but
it's odd that make it a bit more
would have been enough. You know, having sat with these characters for 45 minutes or whatever it was up until that point. That would have been enough. As it obviously is in the actual comics. So.
We get it.
Yeah.
You know, we get it. Also, you know, one of the main. So they're fucked, right? Yeah. They're fucked. Whatever happens, they're fucked. That's the point. They accelerate their demise by making cups of tea out of radioactive fallout rain. Yeah. Which is again, if you want to do this as a kind of character assassination of the British psyche in the face of a changing world. Making tea out of poisonous water.
Their answer to everything is having a cup of tea or a bit of cake. Like, I mean,
Yes.
so going back to the Russian, when they're saying, what are we going to do if he turns up? She was like, oh, maybe we'll just offer him a cup of tea.
That
is the solution to everything, is just have a cup of tea. It's not about if it's radioactive tea, just have some tea.
It's just that their mild reaction to the fact they might be subjugated as well. It's just like, give them some cake. You know, give them a bit of cake. I mean, they are kind of right though. You should have a cup of tea whenever anything goes wrong. It just sort
Not
of
coffee.
Yeah. What are you? Nazi? I don't know. Oh, also something that I noticed, and I think it's the same from the book as well. It's like a kind of carryover. And as I say, it's not a one-to-one adaptation of the book, but it's very, very close. Like it's a very close adaptation of the book. She keeps calling them Jerrys and Germans, and he keeps correcting her.
Ruskies, yeah.
But after a point, he stops.
Right.
And about half the way after the bomb's gone off, when things start to deteriorate, he starts calling them Jerrys as well. Which is a very subtle kind of indication of their mental state. I
didn't pick that up.
Yeah, it's a nice little thing. I found it quite difficult to watch though, more so than if I read in the book.
It is. I mean, as much as despite what I've said about some misgivings I had about it, and do have about it, it is definitely still a very effective thing, and it is a tough watch. Particularly, I mean, I always think things are way more sad when they're animated.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
yes,
I don't know why, but they just are.
Like, so I've never read Watership Down.
Yeah, I don't.
But I'm sure
if it's animated animals, forget. Just no.
Nah, mate.
No.
It's
sadder when it's animals, and it's sadder when it's animated. So if you combine the two, unless it's some stupid, DreamWorks.
If you remade this with like anthropomorphic rabbits,
that would be so much worse.
Dying in a nuclear war.
That would be so much worse, man. But even then, the fact that it's animation does lend it a certain. It does. I don't know why, but it makes things sadder, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, have you ever read? It's not animated. Mouse by Art Spiegelman.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously there's mice and cats and stuff, and that's the kind of metaphor there. I mean, it's a similar thing here because Raymond Briggs, as a kind of visualist, he's good at kind of coding how people look. And it's like, I brought this up the other day, and Duncan and I were talking about Homer Simpson. Like when we were in like my art classes when I was younger, the concept of how many heads people are made up of.
Right.
So like the average adult is kind of 6 heads high, but a child's like 4 heads high, and fashion models you sometimes do 7 or 8 heads high because it's one of those things of constructing human figures. Homer Simpson is only 4 heads high.
Right.
And it codes him as childlike.
Right. Okay.
So you don't really notice it, but it's there, and it's not exactly the same here. But like Jim in particular, looks like a big baby.
Looks like a big toddler.
Yeah.
That's right. I think something else that makes this a difficult watch, and maybe it's just a particularly British thing, but I would say most people in this country, at least of a certain age, are familiar with the snowman as a Christmas thing, right? And I mean, obviously it's Raymond Briggs. The characters look the same, like they inhabit the same universe as that boy.
Yeah.
So it adds a kind of an extra layer of horribleness.
It's got the
this is taking place in the same world with the snowman.
This essentially followed up the Snowman as well. I mean, it's not a sequel, but the Snowman is done in that. I'm not sure how that's done. I think that's animated on. I think that's painted or penciled onto paper.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly how. It's got a strange look. It's got that kind of scratchy look. Whereas this, it's quite radically different in its look, but it's recognisably Raymond Briggs. Very much a kind of Raymond Briggs look. And if you look at Fungus the Bogeyman, which I've never seen the adaptations of that, because there's one of like John Goodman, isn't there, like they did for Christmas. I'm not into Fungus being American, but anyway, John Goodman is a great pick, but I'm not into Fungus being American. There's a part of the point of Fungus the Bogeyman is its dreary Britishness, like because I don't want to go into that too much, but like in the Bogeyman Society, graffiti's like really existential. It's just like people write things like "Your lives are hollow" and stuff like that. People don't draw dicks. Anyway, this something that the book does, that the film also does, but I don't think it's quite as effective. They live in Sussex countryside, so there's lots of greens and stuff. I sort of talk about the village shop. The beginning of the book is kind of these nice, bright pastel colours, blues and greens and yellows and reds. And as they decay and the situation decays, all of the panels start to become green and brown. So Briggs uses a kind of layout that doesn't really alter. It's kind of like Watchmen uses a 9-panel layout, but this uses a kind of, for the most part, panels that don't alter, and they're smaller than your normal sort of comic panels.
Yeah, they are very small, actually.
And he colours everything himself. It's not the traditional comic setup. By the end of the book, you can watch the colour palette of the book change, and by the end it's all green, and it's fucking horrible. And also the book seems to imply that she dies she kind of gets cut off mid-sentence, and it seems like she's... Because and here's a thing that's often talked about in how you convey information in a comic that you can't do in a film. So when Judge Death speaks in the Judge Dredd comics, he's got like crazy speech bubbles.
Right. Yeah.
When Rorschach speaks in Watchmen, before he's kind of had his psychotic break and after, his speech bubble's different.
Right. Okay.
She is sick by the end, more so than him, so her speech bubbles have become kind of weak. Oh, okay. And when he goes into charge of the Light Brigade, his are still solid. Right. Showing that he has more wherewithal than her, and she just goes quiet, and it seems that she's died as they crawled in. The film doesn't necessarily convey that. No,
they fade out as well, don't they, in the film?
And it doesn't matter; they're both fucked anyway. But you know, like it doesn't really convey that as well, if that is the case. But
yeah, it's true. I have to. I did really like the way the ending worked in the film, insofar as that when they get back into those paper bags, and the bags are their models, so almost they're gone at that point. You know, there's no more animation. It just gives it a really odd
I never
look.
thought of it like that. Yeah, because they kind of vanish.
Yeah, they just become these bags
and they rustle and stuff.
Yeah, it's got a real sort of grimy look to it at that point, and I think it just works really well for the ending. And
they're not just kind of like, it's not. There are kind of dissolves in those bits of stop motion. It's not just hard cuts.
Turn and it dissolves between. It's not fluidly animated in that way, which gives it a sort of slightly dreamlike.
And there's a few bits of kind of 3D motion inside the model of the house, because they essentially do kind of slides across and trucks and dollies and things and pans. Just stuff. Again, you know, comics can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a very interesting, because you know, I've talked about adaptation of things from comics to books and games before, and I think this is a really interesting study, because I think in any adaptation of something, you should play to the strengths of the material you're moving into. Yeah. You know, so something like Sin City, I don't think does that. It just uses the book as a storyboard. Whereas this makes pains to do things that the comics couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been perfectly simple for them to just have the whole thing be 2D animation.
2D animation, all the way through. This is a sequel, did you know that?
A sequel. Is it because they're based on Aaron Briggs' parents?
So there's Ethel and Ernest, which is directly about his parents. These guys are based on his parents, but there's a book before this called Gentleman Jim, which is so James is a toilet cleaner or a janitor, and he's like a fantasist, and he fantasizes about the war and stuff. So this is, I mean, and it's a really sweet. Again, it's kind of it is to a degree an examination of like the British psyche and everything about looking backward, but it's quite sweet. And then this, it's like you said, it's like if this was about the kid from The Snowman, you know, it'd be like,
oh! He eventually reached old age and was killed in a nuclear.
Died of radiation poisoning. Yeah. So yeah, it's in a way a sequel. So it's kind of quite nice that he takes that character and puts him in this situation.
Yeah, that's interesting. Was that written before this as well?
Right. Yeah. So the book of that came out before this book. So yeah, and Ethel and Ernest is based more on Raymond Briggs's actual parents, whereas these are kind of like versions of his parents. Yeah, the Ethel and Ernest is more about like his parents. So he's a really amazing artist and writer, I think, and he's one of these people that kind of pisses me off. They're comics. Right, they're comics, but it's never called that. They're always called like illustrated narratives or graphic novels. They're comics. Get your head out your ass. Like, and just because it's got weighty subject matter,
it's still a comic.
It's still a comic. Like, comics are a medium; they're not a genre. That pisses me off. Right, let's rant on that type of shit, because I hate it when people like arbitrarily. I'm not saying the graphic novel is a bad term, but it's
clearly trying to.
It was invented by DC's marketing department to shill comics. Because when I can't remember what prize Watchmen won, but when things go into bestseller lists and they're getting written up in the broadsheets, it's like, well, we can't be reading comics, because people say like, you know, Mouse is a graphic novel. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like Scott Tipton's Understanding Comics, like that's not really referred to as a comic, but the point is it's a comic about comics. And Mouse is a comic. There's nothing wrong with that. Persepolis is a comic, and that's it. Have you seen Persepolis?
No.
That's a really great, because the way that adapts that book, it's really clever. Because it does things that the comic can't and makes your fucking adaptation worthwhile. All right? All right. No, sorry.
So despite the stuff that's been added to this that maybe doesn't work as well, it is it's definitely a good exercise. A good example of an adaptation handled well.
I think, it's a good case study. I think it does a couple of things badly that really jar me. So the fantasy sequences and the profanity, like, I don't think are necessary.
Can I just add to that? Actually, you may not agree with this, but I didn't really like a lot of the soundtrack, namely the things that were actual songs. I feel like that kind of takes you out of it. Like, you have this quite miserable ending, and then it's like, hey, then there's like Is it David Bowie that's singing the song at the end? But whoever it is.
It's Roger Waters at the end. I think
Roger
Bowie
Waters
at the start. Yeah.
I don't know. It kind of. This feels like the kind of thing that should just finish on silence or something.
I'm going to get in with you on that. I think.
And again, at the beginning, it just doesn't really.
Because there are bits of kind of music that's quite driving and haunting.
That's fine. It's having a lyrical content to it. It's too much for something like this, in my opinion.
I agree. I think that's something because it does so much wonderfully.
Yeah.
But I kind of agree that it's sort of certain things jar, you know. And I think it's important that this film caused this story to be seen by more people. Anything that helped disseminate this story and this message, I'm fine with, you know. And it's something that still, like I posted a still of this on Twitter the other day, and I think a lot of people just thought, because I was just saying like, oh well, I'm watching. I didn't say anything. I was like, this is what's on my mind. This is what we're doing, and everybody thought I was just being bleak about the current political situation, and I was kind of like, I can't argue with you on that. Like, I can see why you would say that, but I wasn't. I was just sort of going like, this is on my mind. Duncan and I have been talking about it. That's why I'm doing it.
Yeah, I mean that is another thing to say. I think as well is that stuff like this, maybe, you know, it was very relevant at the time. It maybe became less so. I'd argue now it's probably creeping back up again. You know what I mean? It's been becoming.
Yeah, very possibly. Yeah. I could get behind that. I mean, it's it kind of in and out of relevance. I mean, it's a depressing thing to have, but I think a lot of. What a lot of people have said. I mean, obviously the doomsday clock moved a minute forward a couple of years back. Yeah. Something a lot of people have said is that any kind of nuclear war now would actually be a limited exchange. So smaller yields.
It's all these things that have like multiple small warheads in them, and it's more tactical than the rest of it. But
well,
you never know.
We're going to get onto threads in a minute. We've got a couple of minutes left, but I will say this: quite a lot of this stuff is kind of you have to make the suspension of disbelief that anyone would survive a nuclear war. Now the point of this is they don't. They're out of the blast radius, and that could happen, and then they drink fallout rain and they have their inner core of refuge and they die. Yeah. We're getting onto threads. Threads kind of left turns into sort of basically a sci-fi type situation about 2/3 of the way through. Like it's not completely beyond the pale, but anything where I think Alan Moore said that even about V for Vendetta, because the point is the rest of the world's had a nuclear war, and he's kind of in retrospect. No one would, you know, Britain wouldn't be all right, like it would be shafted or whatever. And, you know, well, actually, there are certain things like Judge Dredd, they have a nuclear missile defence system to stop that, and, you know, whatever. But, like, the concept of someone in the 80s surviving a nuclear war and living into decades hence is pretty fucking unlikely. Right, any final thoughts on this?
I don't know. I mean, just despite what I've said, despite the points that I'd say detract a little bit, I'd still say it's a great film. I think most people should. Well, everyone should probably watch it. Really, it's good to watch something bleak and depressing now and again. Yeah, you know I think it makes an important point. So
it does. I actually think it's a really great adaptation. I think it works on a number of levels. I think there are a couple of things it does badly, but other than that, I think it's a really important film, and that you all should go out and watch it. And now winter's coming and the sun's gone. Why not sit inside your house in the dark and watch a film about some old people dying? Why not do that?
Just something to think about.
Well, whilst you're, before you cry yourself to sleep, Twitter, Instagram, not Instagram, Amazon affiliate, Redbubble,
Patreon,
PayPal, Facebook, Twitter again.
Yeah, why not?
Facebook again, why not? You can find us in those places. Oh, shit. You know what? We went over the time limit. There's probably just audio on a blank screen. That's awkward. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Support your 7th or 8th favourite YouTube channel by buying crap, tat, junk, hogwash and filth at redbubble.com/people/Val Verde Shop.